Jeff. Okay, Helen. And do we expect Jeff Munger?
I think he said
No, we don't. Okay, all right. Let's call it a session. This Board of Airport Commissioners. And the first item is the agenda. Is there a motion to accept the agenda as presented, or are there any amendments?
I so moved to adopt the agenda as presented.
I will add a agenda item at the end, general affairs, at the last item just before. It's sort of similar to our commissioner's items. It's I put on 11A. I think that's what it is. Yeah, but I put on 11A for whatever reason. Yeah. Any other amendments? Did you get? I don't know if you got a second on that. Did you get a second on that? You get a second on the agenda? Motion was made and seconded to accept the agenda as amended. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. We have an agenda. Next item is a public forum. Is anyone here for the public forum in the right room at the airport or online?
I don't see any.
No public forum. Seeing none, we will close that item. And we'll move on to a wildlife presentation with Jake.
May I introduce him to you?
I'm sorry?
Can I introduce him to you?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So today, there he is. We have Mr. Jake Borgeson. He's our USDA wildlife biologist at the airport. He's been here almost 10 years, I believe. Is that right, Jake?
We are in our 9th year now, Nick.
Yeah, 9th year. You all just recently approved a contract extension with the USDA services, specifically with Jake really representing the airport here. He has an office on the facility that we give to him, and he is critical to our operations, critical to our training, and critical to our operations staff who are out on the airfield day in and day out. Not going to steal his thunder though, but Jake, take it away. And you have in front of you lots of airport commissioners, Chairman Bill Keogh, Vice Chair Tim George, Commissioner Jeff Shulman, Commissioner Helen Reilly, and then of course the airport team inside the room here.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick. Yeah, and first and foremost, I just want to extend a welcome to you in my virtual platform here. Things have certainly been interesting, we know, with all of us with the pandemic. The one thing that we always kind of shed light on is the animals don't know COVID. So we've been operational as need be throughout the entirety of this. And, want to just thank Nick and the entire, airport team there for making the effort somewhat seamless, with the ongoing situation. So I guess, Nick, well, I have to just request that you change slides here for me. Is that how you want to do this?
You got it.
All right, excellent. So what I'll kind of do is just run through a brief history of our time here at Burlington. So it's actually extended longer than the actual current 9 years, ongoing 9 years that I have been full-time at the airport. But our involvement with USDA presence on the airport actually began well before even 2011 with the initial wildlife hazard assessment that was performed. So essentially after the miracle on the Hudson, the FAA really called certificated airports in general to really start to look at and do a little bit more with wildlife on airports and namely the bird hazard. And as we all know and are familiar with that story, certainly it's something that brought wildlife to the forefront of airports, aviation, and aviation safety. So With that, the FAA had called a lot of airports to do hazard assessments. Now, a lot of you are probably wondering, what is a wildlife hazard assessment? Well, essentially, in short, it's a year-long comprehensive study of the airport to essentially look at all things birds, all things mammals. So what we're trying to survey is essentially the overall utilization of birds, trends in bird and wildlife utilization of the airport, and outside aspects around the airport that may create a hazardous condition as well. So in that year-long study, it gives a snapshot for the airport and for wildlife managers such as myself to be able to then look at the airport as a whole and better manage the wildlife hazard for aviation. After that hazard assessment was completed, it in turn created what most airports adhere to is called a wildlife hazard management plan. That's where we started to come into play more on a full-time basis back in 2013. So yes, birds and mammals have always been around airports. However, in the last 15 years or so now, airports have done a lot more with wildlife to try to reduce that aviation safety aspect of things.
All right, Zach, the meeting's apparently started. I'm not hearing any audio though, and oh, you did, okay.
Not sure who that was talking or what the question was there.
Might have to switch it to the other one. Okay.
That's okay, Nick. I can keep going on here.
Yeah,
Hopefully
go ahead.
mute out. What ended up happening in 2013 is essentially with the cooperation of Burlington International and the
Did I
Vermont
close out and
International
relaunch it?
Guard, we were able to secure both federal and city appropriated monies to basically get us on full time. There we go. I think we're good now, huh, Nick? Let's see.
Yeah.
All right. Can you all hear me fine? All right. I'm going to keep moving on. So essentially, like I said, back in 2013, we secured a cost share agreement with the airport, as well as with the Vermont International Guard for full-time USDA presence. In turn, that basically meant that we were going to have a full-time wildlife biologist on site to work cooperatively with both Burlington International, the Vermont International Guard, Army National Guard, and the entirety of offsite, potential hazards that we run into. We'll talk about a little of that moving forward. And most notably since then, in recent years, there has been a call for some increased USDA presence in response to the newly acquired F-35s. So we're able to secure some additional federal funds to then have not only myself as an FAA qualified wildlife biologist, but also the assistance of a full-time wildlife technician. That wildlife technician is enabled to fill in during times of increased wildlife activity, such as migrations, as well as to really focus more primarily on the offsite hazard of things. And that being our newly kind of acquired offsite location at Camp Johnson. Camp Johnson often at times does harbor large numbers of large birds, and that was an increased hazard of interest for the Vermont International Guard. So that's where we are now. Like I said, over time since 2013, it has been a cost share funding between the National Guard and the Burlington International Airport. And Nick did allude to the fact that we did just agree to a 5-year cooperative service agreement between Burlington International and ourselves here. So next slide, Nick. So essentially, what is the cooperative mission? Well, with us here on board, as well as for the Burlington International and Vermont International Guard, our goal is safer skies for all who fly. That includes aircraft, traffic and passengers, pilots, as well as birds. It's a conjoined effort for a wider range of species, as well as a wider range of aircraft that we deal with here at this little airport here right in Burlington. So essentially what USDA does is assist the teams at Burlington as well as Vermont International Guard with wildlife hazard mitigation. In that, we adapt and adhere to BTV's wildlife hazard management plan. This is a working document that is annually approved and revised through FAA involvement and standards. Like I said, it's a working document in the fact that as wildlife presence may increase or things change or trends change, airfield utilization changes or offsite potential hazards evolve, we can then adapt this plan with the folks at Burlington and the wildlife team, which involves Nick and the entire operations staff, to create a plan that adapts so that we're on the up and up as far as, you know, evolving to these increased potential wildlife hazards. I can tell you things change from one year to the next, as we all know, and we may see more of one bird or wildlife species that's of hazard one year, where we may not see them the next. Things vary widely by seasonality and by even major weather patterns. We may see birds that move into this area from significant tropical systems that move up through the Champlain Valley. We see heavy bird traffic through the migration season, namely the most prolonged migration being the fall migration, which we're coincidentally at the time of this meeting, we are really starting to get into right now. And I can shed some light on that in a little bit here. So as far as the Air National Guard's equivalent to BTV's Wildlife Hazard Management Plan, we have what's called a BASH plan. That is the Bird Wildlife Aircraft Strike Hazard Plan. Essentially, this is the Air Force's involvement with doing the same adaptive approach at mitigating wildlife hazards, all the while still maintaining military warfighting capabilities in the presence of wildlife and bird species on and in around airports. With all of these plans comes inherent trainings. That's where we also come into play for the airport team, as well as the Air Guard members. Essentially through FAA qualifications, the airport qualified wildlife biologist has to administer annual wildlife hazards training every 12 consecutive months. So typically for us at Burlington, that occurs in June, as well as our revision of our wildlife hazard management plan. And essentially it's a full day's worth of training for all the staff members at Burlington. Any new hired operations staff members receive initial training. And as they stick around through that first year, will then be lumped into the annual June training. So this is a comprehensive training. It keeps everybody, well adapted and with the abilities of mitigating wildlife hazards on the airport. And we'll talk about some of those techniques in a little bit as well. With our annual review of the Wildlife Hazard Management Plan, essentially what we do mostly pre-pandemic, and hopefully we get back to this, is we try to get a big group of folks from the airport together to go over this plan so that we have a wide range of tenant possible interests, airliner interests, et cetera, so that we can adequately reflect the constituents on the airport for creating a plan that we all agree on is doing what it needs to do. And what we need to do is what we feel is the right overall alternative on the airport. We also have a good hand with the BTV team with their annual FAA wildlife review. So when the airport has their annual FAA inspection, basically within that, there is a pretty large section to deal with wildlife. And the FAA will come in and make sure that the airport is in turn doing an adequate job of addressing the wildlife hazard on the airport. So that comes down to not only just what they visually observe or don't observe on the airport via either daytime or nighttime surveys, but also they look at the wildlife training records for the operations team and staff members. They also look at the observation log that the airport holds. So any of the operations folks who are out doing airfield inspections, it's their job to also record wildlife observations while out there. This is a standard that the FAA holds. We have an online catalog database for these observations. And essentially it provides a long-term trend for the airport and for us as a management team to also see and study and track what's going on in the airport from one year to the next. Next slide. So how do we do this? Well, essentially USDA's overall mission is to provide federal leadership and expertise towards resolving wildlife conflicts to allow people and wildlife to coexist. So you can just imagine in that mission statement that obviously on an airport, we run into a gamut of different issues to create an environment where not only wildlife and people can coexist, but birds and wildlife can then safely circumvent air traffic. And in doing that, it creates a really complex, diverse environment. There's a lot going on in these airports. And not many folks realize how attractive airports truly are to wildlife. For all of us that have been in an airplane, the best way I can describe it is if you're at high altitude and you cross an airport, literally it's an island of attractive habitat for birds. And just simply looking at it from elevation, you can see it's a unique element, I guess, so to speak, of the landscape. And that alone in itself is attractive for birds and wildlife and birds and mammals. Airports can provide food, water, shelter, cover, and a travel corridor for birds. There's a wider range. I could talk all day about what we actually see on the airport that may attract certain birds, whether it's just habitat needs in general, or whether it's food items through invertebrates, such as earthworms coming out of the soil. Stuff like that can all play a major role in this complex, diverse environment that we're dealing with to try to make, the safest environment for flying that we can. So the program biologist provides technical assistance and direct management operations using an integrated wildlife damage management approach. So like I said, in a diverse environment, such as an airport like we have here, adjacent to a major body of water like Lake Champlain and a historic migratory flyway, we use a lot of different techniques to integrate this damage management approach so that we then have not only just an operations team at the airport, but also a wildlife hazard management plan that then in turn adequately addresses the wildlife concern, whether it be spring, summer, fall, or winter. So like I said, we're using a dynamic approach, the best techniques possible. We alter these techniques as technology changes. We try to use them sparingly over time so that wildlife doesn't become habituated to these techniques. But essentially everything that we do really serves on the foundation of habitat management. So you all may ask the question of what can you do on an airport to really kind of create a habitat that may not be very desirable for birds, namely large birds, which create the more damaging or more significant strike events overall nationally. So what can we do? Well, on the airport, we can reduce the availability of brush and cover that birds and other mammals may seek as refuge. We can plant grass species on the airfield that in turn are not attractive for, say, foraging migratory Canada geese. In that, avoiding species such as clovers, ryegrass, which produces seeds, which are then attractive to small mammals, rodents, as well as small bird species. When we have prey-based items like small mammals that are attracted to, say, seed-producing grass species or fruit-producing seeds, we then have a larger predatory aspect of things with larger bird species, such as, say, red-tailed hawks, snowy owls, peregrine falcons, and American kestrels. I will talk a lot about raptor translocation efforts here in just a bit. We also look outside the airport. We keep a clean fence line. If you've noticed around the airport, as in the last handful of years, the fence line has drastically been cleaned up. I tip my hat to the team at Burlington for that. FAA recommendations were to remove vegetation 10 to 20 feet around the airport, while the airport went to the highest extent of at least 20 feet. And for anybody who's walked the fence line in recent years past, you'll notice that. Why we do that is so we can see the fence line. So the fence line is maintained so that we can exclude large mammals from attempting to get on or incurred on the airfield. It also is a great security aspect for the security team at the airport, whether it's on the Burlington side or the Air National Guard side. Also, what comes with wildlife is edge. And for anybody who has any sort of wildlife knowledge, birds and mammals like to traverse on the edges of habitat changes. So around the airport, when we have a vast environment of grass and pavement, a sea of pavement, so we say, you then have the hard woodline edge in a lot of places. That's attractive for birds. That's a travel corridor for other animals. Birds like to perch on edges. So the further we can then move this attractive habitat element away from the, say, runway, the better off we are as far as keeping birds and other mammals away from the runway. While on the airport, we have ongoing communication with air traffic control, operations pilots, and ground managers. If we're on the airfield as well as the BTV team, if there's birds that are present in numbers that are potentially creating a hazardous environment, that information is then relayed to air traffic control, and air traffic control does a great job here at Burlington of alerting pilots in the area of potential bird activity. That could be just simply from regular observations that we're having on the ATIS to say, hey, increased bird activity, use caution in the Champlain Valley. It could be a recent vulture sighting of a towering bird over the approach or departure at, excuse me, of one of our runways. That alone right there, just being able to have real-time communication with air traffic control can definitely have a dramatic play in reducing or eliminating a potential catastrophic or significant damaging strike with a large bird, say of vulture size. We see bald eagles towering the airfield, Canada geese movements, waterfowl, gulls, raptors, you name it. So what we also do and provide to the airport is continued monitoring and surveillance. So I talked about our wildlife hazard assessment and what that is. And essentially now moving forward, we have an ongoing wildlife hazard assessment going with our continued monitoring and surveillance. So what we do is we go out on the airport and we do regular systematic surveys throughout the months, throughout the seasons, and we document what we see out there. We vary times, whether it's morning, midday, evening, afternoon, and nights. And it gives us an overall ongoing wildlife hazard assessment so that we can then see any potential changes or alterations in wildlife trends on the airport. With wildlife on airports, I talked about the Hudson incident, really getting things on the forefront of where they are now. Well, with that comes wildlife strike reporting. If we did not have wildlife strike reporting and we didn't have the ability of members of staff, such as operations at the airport and ourselves, to document and sample wildlife remains discovered on aircraft or found on the runway, we would then simply not have the data set that we have now to really be able to utilize a trend to say, we now can confidently say to airfield and wildlife managers what we typically encounter on the airfield and what aircraft typically strike on the airport. So at Burlington International, from the last 30 or so years of wildlife strike data, both the American kestrel and ring-billed gull serve as the #1 and #2, respectively, birds that are struck by aircraft. Both are birds that are in high or large numbers on or around the airport at times, and both can pose significant wildlife strike hazards to aircraft. I talked about wildlife exclusionary methods. Our primary method at Burlington is to keep a healthy, sturdy fence line. We do a tremendous amount of dispersal, harassment, and translocation on the airfield, as well as other direct control measures. Like I said, habitat management serves as the foundation, and then all of our methods on top of that enhance that overall effort made by habitat management. So next slide. And the wildlife strike hazard at Burlington is real. These are not cataloged photos that I got off a national database. These are photos that actually occurred right here at Burlington. So for any non-believers, these are real, true events that have happened that we've collected. So here on the left, where you see the 37, that is a JetBlue aircraft that came in with a juvenile ring-billed gull in the landing gear. Did some minor damage to the interior flaps of the aircraft. But you can just imagine the severity of, say, a a 1 to 3 pound bird if it's in a full ingestion, engine ingestion on any of these aircraft. On the right, this is another ring-billed gull strike on final approach to runway 15. I believe this occurred right over the Winooski River area. No damage to the aircraft. However, you can see what we have notably documented and referred to as snarge on the aircraft. Snarge is any sort of tissue remains that are recovered on an aircraft, which we can then sample, collect material and send to the Smithsonian Institute, where they then can do sort of forensic analysis on this DNA and feather and tissue remains to then give us just about 100% return rate with good samples on what exact species that was. If we didn't have the ability to send the DNA samples or the snarge out to a facility like the Smithsonian, we would not have the amount of information that we do now nationally for wildlife strikes in general. Next slide. I talked about American kestrels as our #1 struck bird species on the airport. Well, this photo on the left is just that. Here's a leading edge strike to a commercial aircraft. And I like this photograph and I like to show it because it shows the fact that right behind where that aircraft was struck is the main engine. And what can happen with a lot of these birds after they're struck is then they get fully ingested by that motor. By ingested, I mean literally sucked in through the vacuum of the engine, and then for whatever material is left is then exiting out the back of the aircraft. From FAA standards and from wildlife strike hazard documentation over the time, full engine ingestions is our #1 cause of concern. Makes sense. When birds go into engines, that's when we can have engine failure. And what occurred at a situation like the Hudson and other incidences across the board over time is with engine failure. Simply, we've created an environment now where that aircraft is possibly destined for a crash or fatality.
Jake,
Yes.
can you, this is great stuff. Can you kind of wrap it up in about 5 minutes or so?
Yeah, I'm just about done, Nick.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yep. What we've got here on the right is a red-tailed hawk strike. This is with a small aircraft, so quite a bit of damage here as well. Next slide, Nick. Here's wildlife strike reporting nationally. I just want you all to see that wildlife strikes are on the rise. Historically, this is a large data set that we have. You can see where we are now currently. In light of COVID, there has been a little bit of a drop in strikes, but this is where we are through 2019. Next slide. When do strikes typically happen at Burlington? Well, you can see the vast majority of strikes occur right where we are now. I talked about fall migration. We have seen fall migration picking up in the last 2 days. Nick, you and I will talk about this in days moving forward. But essentially, most of our birds are struck late summer through the early onsets and into mid-fall. Next slide. I just wanted to show you all too that birds are typically struck closer to the ground, essentially below 3,500 feet. So when we talk about airfield environments and where aircrafts typically stand around airports, if you're below 3,500 feet or even below 500 feet for that matter, that's where typically 70% of all strikes occur. So that being said, just remember now that almost or most all bird strikes with aircraft occur in the airfield environment. Next slide. So just to give you a quick snapshot of one of our real success programs here at the airport is raptor capture, banding, and translocation. We do this for primarily kestrels, red-tailed hawks, snowy owls, peregrine falcons, and merlin. Essentially, we capture birds on the airfield safely. We administer bans on them so that we can have some sort of markership on these birds to examine the overall success of our program. These birds are very prone to aircraft strikes, the way they forage and fly around the airport. Just the nature of how they fly. Birds are then released at suitable habitats at pre-designated locations, typically 30 to 80 miles from the airport. And in this, if you can go to the next slide, Nick, we have had about a 1% return rate of all birds that have been relocated or translocated for that matter from the airport. We know kestrels are the #1 struck species. This is why we have such an intense program. We've had a decline in overall kestrel strikes associated with aircraft as this program has increased. And you can see here when typically strikes occur and when typically translocations with these birds is going on. Next slide. Here's kestrel strikes in general at Burlington in the last 10 years or so. Right now, we have on average 2 to 3 kestrel strikes a year, when at times before we really did much, we were having upwards of 10 strikes or more by just this bird species alone. So the overall trend is going down. That's good. If we can keep it there, that's a slam dunk program. I didn't mean to rush through some of that towards the end. I could talk, like I said, all day, but if you want to go to the next slide, Nick, if anybody has any questions for me, I'm certainly here if we have time. If not, certainly can reach out to Nick or the team or myself and we can answer those questions.
Any questions of Jake?
I'll try to be quick, but Jake, thanks very much. That was a really interesting presentation. I'll try to make quick questions. So just so I'm clear, your position is funded through a combination of, help me understand, how is your position funded? Or your program?
Yeah, so USDA with Wildlife Services is a unique federal agency in the fact that we operate on cooperator dollars. We simply are not funded on federal appropriated monies. We need to collect money through a variety of different sources in order to be able to be operational. So with our program at Burlington International, we basically have a cost share agreement between Burlington International Airport and federal monies that we get from the National Guard Bureau for the Vermont Air National Guard.
Okay, so if
It's very interesting. I know.
All right. Yeah, that'd be interesting to talk more about that. And then just quickly, I'm just curious, do pilots try to avoid bird? Like if they see a flock of birds, will they adjust their direction?
Absolutely, yeah. And when I talked about our communication with air traffic control, yeah, the tower has the ability to have aircraft even go around. We've had that occur here on a few occasions where bird numbers were heavy enough before we were able to disperse them effectively that the pilot, under their own judgment or tower, will simply allow them to do a go around. We've even had it happen with military aircraft. In our opinion, it's better to be safe than sorry. So through that communication, we have the ability then for tower to leave it even up to the pilot's judgment for even approaches and takeoffs as to the bird abundance, what they may be, the overall location, and then they can kind of alter their course, so to speak, or flight pattern for that increased presence.
Okay, thank you.
So Jeff, any other questions?
I just have one, Bill.
Go ahead, Tim.
So over the last, call it 5 to 10 years, what are some of the most significant incidences that have impacted aircraft as a result of wildlife at the airport?
The most significant we've had this year, we had a full engine ingestion with a peregrine falcon this past summer. Peregrine falcon numbers are one of those raptors that's on the increase overall population wise. As far as this year goes, that's the most significant we've had. Years past, we've had other ingestions. Some of those photos I just kind of showed you all are certainly some of our more extreme events. But we treat all birds differently as well. How they occupy the airport, overall historical damages on a national level to aircraft as well. And if you all want some homework for yourself, check out the FAA's Wildlife Strike Database. You can type in any airport that you've ever been to. Burlington is one of those, and you can see the real-time data that's there of birds that have contacted aircraft. And I can tell you the amount of birds that'll show up on that database will surprise a lot of you.
Thank you, Jake.
Any other questions? Jake, thanks. It's amazing the services that you provide. Just think the 1 million passengers that come in and out of this airport have no idea of what you guys do to keep our planes safe. So thank you for what you do for us, and appreciate your presentation today. It was very enlightening.
Yeah, thank you all. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Nick and the team.
Thank you, Jake.
Okay, the next item on in our agenda is the consent agenda. Is there a motion?
I move that we approve the contents of the consent agenda as presented.
Is there a second? Is there a second?
Yes, I second.
Thank you. Motion been made and second to accept the consent agenda. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. So ordered. Next one is a 601 status of the Director of Aviation position. I will waive that because we expect to have the mayor
Here.
Oh, he's here. Okay. We'll substitute the name instead Bill Kia, Burrow Weinberger. Welcome, Mayor. I didn't see you. Come ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Go ahead.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Is it our custom here we take it off mask when we're speaking? Is that? Thank you for the opportunity to come and just be with this commission as we take the next steps with moving through this challenging period where, of course, none of us anticipated or desired. Thank you. I've received communications from many of you in recent weeks. This has been a very challenging time. I am glad the council took the action they did last week, which has allowed us, I think, to some clarity about where we stand and where we go from here. I care about this commission a lot. You all know I served on this commission for nine years before stepping down when I was elected mayor. And I basically wanted to be here to assure you that City Hall is doing everything we can to support Nick and the team in this transition. Nick and I had a lengthy meeting earlier today, and the kind of full tools of City Hall are available to support the airport in any way needed. I think I believe we are in capable hands with Nick's leadership during this period. I think he's already been in this acting role now for a couple months, and from everything I'm aware of, this period has gone very well. And I know he's taking steps to further strengthen the team during this period. And I know there's a lot of positive things happening. I was very encouraged to hear that the second major grant of pandemic assistance funding has come through, and that really puts us, I think, it's very reassuring to know that we have that level of financial support from the federal government when we do see the employments and revenues recovering, but that we know we're not back to where we were before. So I think having really encouraged about how I understand the financial situation is being managed. Wanted to be available to you for any questions that you had that we can answer in this forum, and also available to commissioners in other ways. I know it has been challenging up until the investigation was done and we got clarity about where we're going. My ability to communicate with you all was pretty limited, but we're out of that period now, and I want to answer any questions I can and offer the commission any support that it needs during this period. So that's really why I'm here.
Questions of the mayor? I have a couple, if I may.
I have one too.
How long would you anticipate this search will take place? And secondly, do you plan to go national for a director, or have you gone that far yet?
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, I have not kind of nailed down all the details about how we will proceed to a permanent director. And I would welcome either now or as follow-up to this, any thinking the commission has on that. Both, for a variety of reasons, which get into a little bit, I don't plan to immediately initiate a search and a whole search process. I have a lot of confidence in Nick, and I think we can take some. I don't feel nervous or urgency to move to that at this moment, but I would welcome input from the commission. Again, either here or another way, if you feel that that is something that needs to be moved on quickly. I do think, generally, I do not make permanent appointments without going through a search process, and this and it is, I haven't completely made the decision that's how we will do this, but that's sort of my default, is that we will go through a national search process before we name a permanent director. But I would welcome the commission's input about that decision. And if we do go through a search, I want to assure the commission, as it says in the charter, we will have a search committee that will have 2 members of the airport commission serve on that search committee, and look forward to working with the commission in that way on the search.
Thank you. Helen, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. Hello and welcome, Mayor Weinberger. I was just curious in terms of your thinking, and it's probably too soon now, but I was concerned in the past about I guess the role that the airport commission has in terms of evaluating or providing you and the council, the city council of Burlington, evaluation about whomever is the director. And I'm wondering if you're considering or working on ways to either include us more or share with the commission the processes that you use in order to make those kinds of evaluations, so we don't have another situation as we've just experienced.
Great. I appreciate the chance to talk about that, and had noted some comments that you had made. And it was one of the reasons I did want to be here and talk about this explicitly, especially. So let me start by saying what we do from the mayor's office perspective, and what our hopes and expectations are with the existing process, and then try to address your question if we're going to make any changes to it. Almost all of our department heads are appointed on an annual basis. There are a couple of charter exceptions to that. The tax assessor and the HR director have longer appointments, but all other department heads, if the mayor has discretion, how long the appointment terms are. And my practice, as I think has been pretty similar to prior mayors, has been to make only 1-year appointments. I do it that way because I want the appointment process itself to add some accountability and discipline and rigor to the kind of oversight of the department heads. When for the department heads, the majority of department heads, like the aviation director, work with a commission, and we have had a regular practice of, in the months leading up to reappointment, requesting input from the commission about that reappointment, and that is intended to be that is a sincere request for any input that commissions have, and some of the discussion in the media, I think it may have come across as if like that was a perfunctory step. I want to just be really clear. I don't see it as a perfunctory step. I respect commissions. I know you all put time into it, a lot of time into this. You put a lot more time into airport issues in some sense than I'm able to. And that is a sincere, earnest request that the commission, in whatever way seems appropriate to that commission. We have not dictated that or felt it was appropriate for us to sort of lay out exactly how any commission should do that. But get to us in any feedback you have about that reappointment. And I will say there have been multiple times in my time in this office where the feedback we've gotten from commissions has not been entirely positive and has at times started a process of making a change. And so I want this opportunity to say to you all directly and say publicly that's the feedback I am looking for you when making that request. And I hope that's clear and that makes sense.
Okay.
We have that. All that said, I think it is fair for the question, is there, additional support or specificity that we could ask for? We have at times over the last 9 years sent specific goals that we are working on with versus various departments, asked commissions to weigh in on the degree to which you feel we are making progress. If there are things that I could do and that the City Hall team could do that would be helpful to you going through an annual process of weighing in, we should talk about that. And there may be more that would make sense to do and some changes to the process along those lines. I will say we are before, and I'll stop talking a moment. I love your response. The city's ability, we are set up in a way that gives department heads a lot of authority and independence. And we do not have a system of deputy mayors, for example. There are something like 25 people that in our system, the system that I kind of inherited basically, and I take responsibility for it, but I just want to make clear this is not just the practice of this administration. There are a large number of department heads, and the city has never kind of resourced deputy mayors or some other kind of level of oversight of department heads that would be required if we were to want a very different system than we currently have. Our system depends a little bit on our smallness. I mean, I tend to believe, generally speaking, when there are problems in the city, the mayor's office finds out about it. Our system requires is a, like many, as similar to code enforcement, we have a complaint-based system in HR basically, and ultimately it is that complaint-based system that worked here and that brought in a relatively short period of time some attention and action. Those are the systems we have. If we want to move to a different system, I guess what I'm trying to say, it might require resources that we don't have today. I too am a little bit, I think we should learn everything we can from this situation. And it is jarring that these concerns that were raised so strongly during these investigations did not come to you or me previously. And I think that should have us on reflecting on whether there needs to be changes. I think we should not, I also think, let me leave it at that for now. I've been talking for a long time.
Helen, may interject this. I think every year the commission has been given a letter that's perfunctory written, and we just signed it. I think that we made some minor changes this past year. I can assure you that we will schedule a review of the director, whoever it is, and we will write that letter and not staff. But so you can bet on that one, Helen.
Well, I think we need to think about how to do that, and I would welcome a little more conversation, I guess, and discussion about how to go about that. I mean, the allegations made it sound as if the staff or the employees at the airport did not have like a safe way to complain or lodge concerns. That perhaps is not our bailiwick to develop that, but I think that might be helpful as well. And maybe I'm wrong, but if this was brand news to the mayor, then it would appear that people who, felt ill-served or treated didn't have a way to express that in a safe way and not, potentially lose their job or something like that. So I think that's another area for contemplation. I don't have the answer to it, but I think it's important to, make sure that Nick continues as a good director. And I have a lot of faith in him as well. But I think that's all I'll say. So I appreciate your candor, Mayor, and we look forward to having a conversation, I think, amongst the commissioners and with you about how to move forward in a better way.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Yeah, thank you. And I do just want to, we are definitely digging into exactly that issue. Is some kind of new system, why is something new needed for employees to feel safe raising concerns? It does seem there may have been, and I would say I don't think we fully have our arms around yet the degree to which the degree to which some of these concerns, the degree to which it is that issue that employees did not have a safe place to go. That is one of the things we're trying to understand better and consider, and may well be recommending changes. And you're right, I don't yet have a recommendation there. It is definitely one of the things we're considering. It does also, as we get deeper into this, I kind of have increasing indications that there may have been, some of, I think some of the concerns and behavior may have been relatively recent in the way in which they became as acute as they were. I think there's some changes in Gene's role over time that may have impacted how this unfolded as well. So I think there may well be more for us to talk about. I'm sure there'll be more for us to talk about. I'm not able to address all that in this meeting, but I basically wanted to come here and say, yes, we're working on all this and we'll talk to you further. And thank you, Bill, Chair, for, I don't quite understand how to the degree it became just a perfunctory effort. That was never that was never my intent, and it never will be my intent. And let's make sure that doesn't happen again.
We let that go, okay? I'll accept some responsibility for that.
Okay.
Also, I had some information that's been in the press, and I didn't know where to go with that information. I didn't know whether to go to the mayor's office or the commission, and I just withdrew anyway. So as long as it's going to be fixed, so we have a whistleblower process or whatever else you want to call it. Any other questions from the commission?
Yeah, Bill.
Go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for coming to the meeting today. I know it's sort of the first opportunity that you've had, since the situation was clarified, and I think we all respect the confidential nature of this kind of personnel matter. I was happy to hear you just talk about the resources from the city that are available to Nick and the team at the airport. I think all of us are ultimately our focus is on making sure that the airport is thriving and is healthy. And one of the first things that, one of the realities of this, just looking objectively, is that we're sort of down an executive level person. Nick had a full-time job before he became the interim director. And I guess I'm interested to hear, and maybe this is to you, Nick, as well, but just sort of, the plan, and maybe it's an evolving plan, but just to make sure that the airport remains healthy and vibrant. And it's obviously it's a critical time just coming back from COVID.
I'm happy to take a first shot at that, and then probably there's probably more to texture add, Nick, I think. But definitely one of the things that Nick and I discussed today is that there has been a vacancy at one of the deputy director positions for some time, and Nick wants to take action to fill that, and I fully support that, as well as he laid out for me and I'm unclear if you guys have started to discuss this or not, but if not, I'm sure you will, a related reorg within part of one branch of the airport operations that probably makes sense to do simultaneously with filling that position, and that so I green-lighted Nick in developing that and bringing it to you and then the council to get that reorg done. So both moving forward with filling the position, deputy director position immediately, and then this modest reorg. That's yeah, I think we basically have a situation now that between the decision to keep that deputy position open previously and what's happened with Gene, that we've essentially had one person for a couple months now, at least, filling 3 roles, and that's untenable. It's got to change. So I think we're looking to really address that quickly. What do you want to add to that, Nick?
Yeah, I think the critical piece that you mentioned is the operation side of the equation. So safety and security, we just had the presentation from Jake. That's a small portion of what we're going through. And that's why that position, the deputy director of aviation operations, is the critical path for me to rehire that immediately, so that we can have that coordination efforts among both the operations team and the maintenance team on our airfield, on our safety and our security requirements. I think we have an outstanding and a very safe and secure airport, but I do think it also is too much for one individual, regardless of if that individual is me or not. So I am working eagerly with the mayor's office and the mayor himself to perform these actions.
Glad to hear that. Anyone else?
I guess I just have one other thing.
Go ahead.
As you think about how the performance review process works for department heads, and I don't want to focus just on the airport, right? Yeah. The same issue could exist in multiple places. So as you think of, what new inputs are going to be part of that process, I think it'd be great if you sort of got maybe a representative from a bunch of different commissions to weigh in on the commission's input as to how we can contribute to that.
Sure.
Anyone else? That's it, Mayor. Thank you very much for coming. Take the rest of the day off.
Well, I thank you. It is good to be back out here with you, and thank you for your service during this important time for the airport. Let's do this again soon.
Good. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Oh, now we go to some, we reeling from that, are we, or not? I don't know. That was very productive. I appreciated it being there. I think all of you guys appreciate that, just hearing it right from, yeah, okay. Next item is the action items, the Airport American Rescue Plan Act grants. Is there a motion?
I move that we recommend for approval by the Board of Finance and City Council to accept the FAA Airport American Rescue Plan Grant Act.
That motion has been made. Is there a second? Come on.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any, Larry, you want to explain that? Is that yours or is that?
I'll start it real quickly.
Okay.
And then pass it to
Yeah,
Marie.
give us the 10-minute version.
The 10-minute version.
That's up from 60 minutes, 60 words.
60 words. So this is our third grant as part of some of the coronavirus aid packages that have gone out. We've had CARES, we've had CURSA or CRSSA. This is probably the final one, at least the final one that we've heard of in legislation, totaling $7.6 million. Some of that, most of that, over $7 million associated with helping us directly on our operating budget, our day-to-day activities here at the airport, as well as filling in some of the local shares from some of the larger grants that you have approved in the past. But it's similar to the CURSA grant funds. There's also a portion of this that can directly help airport terminal concessionaires like restaurants and or news and gifts and car rental companies with some of the shortfalls in their revenues as well. That total is just shy of $600,000 on helping them alleviate some of their obligations to the airport. All of these funds essentially do come to us on a reimbursement basis, similar to all of the other grants that you've heard of from the FAA over the years. And we are exceptionally happy to receive these grants, and I'll leave it with that.
Yeah, so we are. This is like a really good. We know that there's still variability and uncertainty that will continue with the Delta variant, or will continue with COVID or any other variants that is going to affect our traffic, and that traffic has a direct, as it goes up and it goes down, it's going to have a direct impact onto our revenues. So this is a huge, again, positive shot in the arm in terms, it is a 4-year grant. It's very important because as the recovery takes time to happen and maybe goes up and down, we're going to get into our revenues a little bit. We know we're going to see some vulnerability with that. We just don't know quite what it looks like. But this does help to guarantee and ensure that the airport will continue to be strong, will be a viably financially option here for the airport, and we'll be able to continue to use that as we need to support and cover those operational expenses should our revenues not be as high as we would like them to be.
Wow. Well, any questions on that issue? Any questions? Seeing none, are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. So ordered. Next one is this, did you cover the grant amendment as well?
I did not.
Okay,
So I would like to move that we recommend for approval by the Board of Finance and City Council, the AAP 127 grant amendment.
motion been made and seconded by
Second.
somebody.
Second.
The explanation, who's gonna do the explanation? Motion been made and seconded.
Looks like we have lost Jeff Schulman too. He's not on any longer.
Anyway.
No, there he is.
Disregard.
Okay, I'll take a quick stab at this, Nick. All right, this is, we're doing a little housekeeping with this. We got an email from the FAA, and what happens is there are maybe other airports that didn't accept their grant. So they did a little reallocation. We got $922 or 900, and I want to say this right, is it $92 more? We already funded for the second stimulus package. We had already received $3.8 million. So we just wanted to make sure we came, let you know that happened, let you know that we didn't have to do anything special for other than email them. That we only had to email and sign something, and we were declining that $992. So we were accepting.
On top of that, and just to be prepared, because that might happen with the ARPA grant fundings, the one that you just approved, there's a contingency in that approval that you just passed a minute ago, just in case there is a reallocation.
Okay. Any questions? If so, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. So ordered. Next item is sound data. Hannah?
No, financial package.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Financial package. Sorry, Hannah. Stand by.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just go through. Would you like me to go through my notes?
Sure.
Okay. So I am, I feel like we've been turning the corner a bit And we've been seeing, probably saw from the employment report, that our employments have paused, so we're seeing a lot more traffic. We see a few people out there. And so as we go through, I have kind of what I've included here is July, our P&L for July, and the cash report for the period ending at the end of August, and then I just have the AIP debt receivable. There is no debt coverage score provided for you, as we're not paying any other than what is an escrow that is held by the trustee, as we have postponed payments to the refinancing of our debt. I have a high level, I'm gonna provide for you how we're using the money, because we have we have two stimulus packages, one that you've approved tonight that we expect the FAA will issue the grant any day, actually. Hopefully, we know what's coming. It could be 30 days out. We know it's coming.
By legislation, it has to be delivered by November of this year.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have two that we already received, and I wanted to keep everybody informed with how we've been using that money. And it's great that we got it, but I think it's important to communicate how much we've drawn down, how much we got left. So for the CARES Act money, we've drawn down $7.3 million out of that 8.7. So we still have, a little bit over $1 million left. And right now we're sort of reserved that we're able to use that money under the CARES Act for our local share portion on our grants. And the grants that we've gotten in the last year and a half have all been 100% federal. There's no local share on them except for the TIP project. But everything, other grants that we're still doing some construction on or other things, some of them still have local share. So we're using it on that. The second grant that we got, the CRSSA grant, we got a total actually of $4.404 million, including the concession money and including the money we got for our operational. We spent about $2.1 million. We just drew down some more money, another $200,000 on there that I put in a request for. I haven't received it yet. But so we still have about $1.7 something million available. And we're going to talk about for July, as I get into finance, I did not actually need. Our revenues were much recovered. I did not need to draw down any of the stimulus money to help me cover my operational expenses for the month of July. That's the first month I haven't needed. The revenues have been recovered enough and sufficient enough to cover all our operational expenses well. So, that was I'm very excited as your finance person here to convey that. So I'm going to get in and talk about the year-to-date revenues. So in July, our year-to-date revenues were $1.6 million. And this is significantly higher than we saw last year, but last year, of course, we took a pretty big hit. So I want to let you know it's $736,000 higher than we took in July 2020. But that was an odd year. So I also am going to try to give some perspective to that number and look back 2 years and say, well, this is how, because just compared to last year, it's part of the story, it's not all the story. And so compared to the 2 years ago, which was our highest year ever, if you look at our revenues, we're at 87% of 2 years ago revenue. So July was well for us. And again, it's the more passengers that you have flying, that is where we saw those revenues really dip, and those revenues we're seeing come back pretty well, pretty strongly with those recovered passengers. Our expenses were year to date for July were $850,000. So it's about $100,000 higher than the previous year. But when I looked at it, some of the timing of when we paid a couple of big bills got paid maybe the end of July, but actually they got paid in a little bit in August. So a little bit of difference in timing those expenses. So all in all, pretty even killed our expenditures. Our cash is doing exceptionally well. And a lot of this had to do with those revenues that have been coming in. And July, August, I think is going to be as strong as July was. So our cash is up to $4.8 million in our bank. We don't owe the city anything. So we're doing well. I wanted to put a note in here for the annual update is in the finance, our finance group is actively preparing to close out the past year and look and we do all of the reconciliations and make sure that the stuff that we have to go ahead and post that we post at the end of the year and our financial statements that we're working on. Our auditors are coming in, I think about October 11th, 12th. They're coming that week. And
Okay.
So they're coming on site because a lot of audits are.
I'm not sure if it'll be physically on site or a lot of it, we upload pretty much everything they need anyway. We've been doing that for years. They came on site last year and they came on site for single audit last year. So we'll see what they choose to do. We can handle it with all the technology we have, we can handle it any which way. So won't affect the outcome at all. And then our AIP receivable, we were owed about $2.3 million from the FAA this within the last couple of days. The FAA, they have a system that we use, it's called Delphi, and it's what we put our reimbursement request in to get the money reimbursed back to us if we spend it for these grants. They close it down for about a month because it's the federal fiscal year that ends the end of September. And they're doing that now. So we just got pretty much everything that we could go and put a request in, we did. And so I anticipate in the next week or so, we're going to see us about $1.4 million that we'll be getting back pretty quickly. So that concludes the highlights of my financial report. And I'm wondering if anybody has any questions.
Any questions, Marie?
I do know.
Tim, go ahead.
Two quick things. Maybe this is one of those timing issues, but I noticed that some of the computer related expenses were substantially higher. So I did both versus budget. I think it was 39% of the full year budget and up substantially from last year. Just was curious if that's a timing thing or if there's something